Hello and welcome to the Now Spinning Magazine podcast with me, Phil Aston. And on this episode, I have with me Tim Durling, rock author and music fan. And Tim, well, I've got three books here. I've got Y&T, Kansas, and my favorite, Sammy Hagar. Favorite of the three books that I've been reading. But I know, Tim, you've written other books as well. But for my audience, where I'd like to start is tell us a bit about your background. I mean, and how you thought about becoming a writer, becoming an author, and going down this path.
Thank you very much, Phil. It's a pleasure to be on here. The writing thing happened quite by accident. I'm just a lifelong music fan. And my profession, what I do for a living, is I work in radio and I write commercials. So I've always written, when I was in school, I would write short stories and things like that, but it never really went anywhere. But I never really entertained the idea of writing anything until, oddly enough, COVID happened, which is a strange springboard for a writing career. But being introduced to Zoom and the ability to talk to people from all over. One really important thing that happened is I made the acquaintance of a mutual friend, Martin Popoff, a noted Canadian writer, and I had him on my my YouTube channel, Tim's Vinyl Confessions, and we were talking about, of all things, 8-track tapes. And there was a specific genre that I was trying to ask him about, when he remembered them disappearing from store shelves, and if he remembered if the record clubs continued to make them available, because they did. And at the end of that conversation, he said, I think there's a book idea here. And I was really inspired by that, because I thought, if Martin Popoff thinks I have a book idea, then I must have a book idea. And that turned into my very first book, Unspooled, an adventure in 8 tracks. And so this tracks through the 1980s, basically, because if you were a member of the record clubs in the United States, 8 tracks were made all the way through 1988. And for some reason, I've always been fascinated by the fact that they coexisted alongside CDs for about 3 or 4 years. And that turned into that was a really successful Kickstarter campaign. And then I discovered that it was possible to put out books through Amazon, which is, I carried that book over. This is actually the second edition, the Amazon edition. And then I kept thinking, well, what else could I do? And, one of my favorite bands has always been Y&T. I've always thought they were an unsung band and should have been more popular. And as near as I could tell, there's never been a book written about this band. And I thought a band that's celebrating a 50-year anniversary should be commemorated in this way. So I kind of took the approach that Martin took with his panel books, where you have a series of people come in, you've participated. I believe you and I are both in Martin's Rainbow book.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, we are. Yeah.
And so I thought that's a good way of gathering content and getting different opinions. So that's what I did for the Y&T book. I mean, I was fortunate enough to make the acquaintance of the legendary Hugh Syme, who did this lovely album cover for me.
Yeah.
And after that, I said, well, who else could I do? And one of my favorite bands that is a well-known band, but I've always thought deserved a little bit more attention, is Kansas. So that's where this came from. Let It Be Your Guide. And this is another panel book.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And then the book that you mentioned as your favorite, thank you very much, is this Red on Black, The Listener's Guide to Sammy Hagar. I'm an enormous Hagar fan. I see you've got the Red album down there on, and obviously I first became aware of Sammy when 150 came out, but I got into his solo career. And again, I've always looked at, if somebody else had done a book like this, then I would have just bought it. But there didn't seem to be a book around quite like, there's been books about Sammy.
Yeah.
Concentrated on his solo career. So I said, I'm going to go through each album. And this one is different. Because it's just me. I did this one myself. So I'm really glad with how it came out. Yeah, I've got, as you know, I've got another one in the works, and I've actually got another one after that that is not pretty much written, but it's pretty much there, and it's been very rewarding. I mean, it's not something that a person is going to get rich at. If this is just it's not my job. It's just you could call it a side hustle, but I really enjoy it. And one of my favorite things is when someone comes back to me and says, for example, I was never a big Kansas fan. I had the best of, but now I read your book and I went and bought 3 of their albums. That's great. That's really that's the same goal I've always had with my YouTube channels. Talk about the music that I love, and even bands that or artists that people might know a lot about. It's like, yeah, but do you really know how many different albums they've had or how varied their music is? So that's kind of what it is. I mean, as much as I'm a huge Kiss fan, but what am I going to write about on Kiss that hasn't already been written? I would rather write about bands that there aren't a ton of books on. Unless I could think of an angle that was so unique, I'd rather stick with the unsung bands or the bands that just don't seem to get the attention. So that's kind of been what I've been doing, and it's been like I said, it's been very rewarding. It's been challenging, but for the most part, it's been a really fun experience. So 5 years ago, I had no intention of doing this, and now I've got 4 books published. So it's pretty amazing.
I haven't written a book, although, as you say, I've been involved in a couple now. But my journey to doing what I'm doing now is basically very similar to yours. It was basically born out of COVID. And so I didn't, 5 years ago, I didn't think I'd be sitting here doing anything like this. But again, similar to you, I just wanted to talk to other people about music and about my own feelings and experiences and what I liked. And I think that's what I like about these books. And I love the panel idea. And the other thing about them is that when I started to do this, being in the UK, I didn't know anyone else in the USA who I just started a YouTube channel and a website, and it was a Facebook group, etc. But when I look at who was on your panel, I know many of those people now really well. But obviously I didn't before. So I think the other thing that comes across when I was especially reading the Kansas one, because I remember when you first approached me about this, and I was still, it wasn't that long ago technically, but for me it probably was, is that when I was reading that book now, because I know Pete Pardo and Grant and all these people, and Martin Popoff, it means so much more. I think because I know them and I know, and I think that for me, I am a fan of Kansas. I've got most of the albums, and most of them came in the Columbia box set, etc. Yes. But because I know the characters and the way you've kind of weaved it together, it has made me play those albums more, because I thought, I haven't played that one for ages, or that one. I haven't really paid much attention to that particular album, but the way it's been described and the way other people suddenly shine a light on it as being their favorite has made me think maybe I need to go back to that. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. And that happened to me too. There would be albums that I was never that, I didn't dislike them. There just weren't ones that I reached for a lot. But someone in particular would just go on about, oh, you got to listen to the drum fills in this song and then that song. And I thought, okay, maybe there's something I'm not getting here. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I've made some fantastic friends, through doing this in all over the world. And now I find, let's say if I pick up one of Martin's books, whether it's, Rainbow or Thin Lizzy or Robert Plant, when I know the panelist that's speaking, I hear it in their voice. And I was like, well, I know I've been on enough shows with them to know, yeah, this is something that they would really like, or I can get the humor out of it. And yeah, it's really interesting how, there is a very loose network of us. And sooner or later, you make other acquaintances and you put faces to names. So yeah, it's good. And, for instance, the Thin Lizzy book, I've been actively getting into Thin Lizzy this year. I had a few of their albums, but now I just want to get them all. And it's really fun to have something to refer to and go, okay, well, what was that song that they said to listen to about halfway through? Because there's a spoken word part in it, that sort of thing. And that's what I tried to do with all of my books. And with the Sammy book, I really wanted to impart to people that, I think a lot of people think of Sammy as this guy that sings about cars and girls, you know what I mean,
Yeah,
and tequila, and
yeah.
that's all very true, but there's some varied stuff, especially on that early Capitol stuff, and some of the cover songs that he's done. And I wanted to get into that. I also wanted to talk about people that covered songs that he had done. So that was a whole section unto itself. That was a lot of fun because I learned a lot. I had no idea just how many different people out there recorded Sammy Hagar's songs. So
No, I did. I found that really interesting,
yeah,
Tim, because I didn't know that either. So I learned a lot from that book. But I also agree that the early Capital years, things like Free Money, Cracking the World, and they're very different and they're very deep lyrically in many ways.
yeah.
They're very varied albums as well. Excellent stuff.
Yeah, I mean, everybody from Megadeth to Bette Midler has covered Sammy's
Yeah.
songs. I mean, it's really crazy. And yeah, those early Capitol albums, especially his first two, it always sounded to me like they were just throwing everything against the wall in the hopes that they stuck. I mean, he's doing Van Morrison songs and
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
and and,
Donovan,
uh,
yeah.
Donovan and Bob Welch, and so I wanted to get that down. Whether or not I like all these albums, I wanted to get it down because I think that, the internet is great, compared to when I was growing up and getting into bands. If there was an album that I didn't have, well, if a friend of mine didn't have it and I didn't know anybody that had it so I could at least make a copy of it, well, I wasn't going to hear it. You couldn't just listen to something. And even now when people say, "Oh, just go on YouTube and listen to some stuff," I think that you need a guide. I think that you can go down wrong paths that way. I like to direct people to say, well, what do you like? And if you like this band, this band, this band, I would say start with this album. And I would hate the example that I use a lot is Alice Cooper. I would hate for someone you say, well, I know a couple Alice Cooper songs. I think I'll buy one of his CDs, and they buy one of those awful repackaging of that 1969 Toronto show where it's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
it's just practically unlistenable, and for somebody to go, this is terrible, and never ever
yeah.
check out Alice Cooper again. It's important to say, well, okay, that's Alice Cooper, but here caveat. But so I really wanted to get it down, and so that someone that's likes really heavy stuff would read about an album like musical chairs and go, well, I might like a couple songs on here, but I don't think this is where I want to start with Sammy, that sort of thing. And yeah, and hopefully that enthusiasm comes out because this is stuff I take very seriously, and I've been since I was a kid, I studied liner notes and always read the credits and tried to remember who wrote what and who produced which albums and who played on them and all of that stuff. So that all helps. That all informs these books that I do.
So after the 8-track one, the next one you did was Y&T, and you said that's one of
Mm-hmm.
your favorite bands. I mean,
Absolutely.
when did you? Is it wow? When did you get into Y&T? Was it when they were Yesterday and Today, or was it one of the? Was it
Oh,
Earthshaker or
oh
around that
no,
time?
oh no. I would have been 2 years old when the first Yesterday and Today album came out.
Yeah,
And it's a cliche, but the first that I ever heard of the band is that I saw the video for Summertime Girls. Now, I wasn't really actively buying music at that point. I was listening to Top 40 radio and watching whatever video shows I could find. So that was when I became aware of them. I didn't get into them until 1990 when the 10 album came out.
wow,
And I saw the video.
yeah,
I happened to catch the video for "Don't Be Afraid of the Dark," and I just love Dave Meniketti's voice and his guitar. And I said, okay, I've heard of this band. I know they've been around for a while, and I just started looking to find whatever I could find by them, which, like the Sammy Hagar Capital stuff, was not easy. This is pre-internet.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm in Eastern Canada. That was never a strong spot for some of these artists. So uh, I had no car. I had no access to. I didn't know where to look for used record stores at the time. So but Y&T very swiftly became a favorite of mine, and I just never understood why they came so close to sort of breaking through, but never quite did. They've got a lot of respect among a lot of bands, a lot of their peers at the time, but they should have been, I think, a big band on the level of, Aerosmith or Van Halen. I think that they had the potential to be a really, really well known and a band that would have like a dozen or so songs that you're sick of hearing on classic rock radio. I think that they had that much talent. So that was a no brainer for me. If I was going to write a book about one band, even if you'd asked me that when I was 16 years old, who are you going to write a book about? I said, well, Y&T, but I would have had no idea how.
It made, I think the Earthshaker was 1981, and in the UK it was all word of mouth. There was a review for that album in Sounds, the music newspaper, and Kerrang as well. And it was, I think, in the import racks. And a few of my friends bought it. Then more of my friends bought it. We went to rock discos and they started playing tracks from it. And Rescue Me in particular, and I Believe in You, and were just the vocals, the vocals, the delivery was just like, and the fact the guy played guitar as well.
Yeah.
I remember it really took off in the UK, and so I think they hastily organised a tour for the band, and I don't think the manager knew anything about the UK because the gigs were all over the place, and the gig I went to was in the middle of the countryside somewhere in an area of the UK called the Cotswolds, which probably has never seen a rock band before or since, and so in the middle of nowhere, and we all had to travel for miles to get to it, and they were fantastic. But even they didn't know why they were playing in this kind of little village hall type place. But I think, and I also think I was on the show with Pete Pardo where we talked about the best tracks to end side 2 of all time. And I put I Believe in You as one of my choices because I think the way that song ends with an ending that seems to go on and on and on, but the way it builds, I think it's one of the greatest songs of all time.
Yeah, it's epic. It's almost like it's got 3 endings. It's almost like here's the end of the song, now here's the end of the album, and it's just amazing. And you hit upon something that I think factors in to maybe why they didn't make it. They didn't have high-powered management. I'm not saying that they didn't have good management. I'm just saying that they didn't have a Q Prime, or they didn't have the names are escaping me now, but any of the well-known, Shep Gordon or Ray Daniels, or people that just got it, that just understood how, it's not like touring the California circuit. This is different, and you got to plan it out so that it makes sense, and you can pay for your gas and all of that. And also, I think that A&M wasn't the optimum label for a heavy rock band like them to be on. I think that they were a perfectly good label if you were a band like Supertramp or Styx or Nazareth or Bryan Adams or 38 Special. But A&M always just seemed to be a little bit behind when it came to marketing heavy rock. And there's no better example of that than the fact that it wasn't until Mean Street came out in 1983 that they allowed Y&T to shoot a video. Now, MTV had been on the air for 2 years, and I maintain, because the history of MTV is such that they were desperate for music videos. And if they had done even cheap little soundstage videos for Rescue Me or Don't Want to Lose or any of those songs, they would have gotten played, and they would have had that instant recognition, no matter if they'd ever played that section of the United States or not. So being until 1983 before they get their first video, it's just always felt like Y&T were always trying to play catch up, and they were always just a few years behind. And sooner or later, in the industry, people would say, "Oh, it's these guys again, and they haven't broken through yet." Well, it's not for lack of trying, and they just seem to have bad luck at just about every turn. But it wasn't the music. It wasn't the music. They could have broken through several times, whether it's, I know that they were considered sort of an honorary new wave of British heavy metal band, and they had a big following in the UK. And I think they did quite well in Japan. Japan's always been receptive to that sort of music. it's just a shame that, they had to go over there to get the recognition. They couldn't get it in their own backyard.
Yeah, it's very true actually, because you're right, they were in the right place at the right time. But as you say, without the video, literally within 2 years, the Dockens and the Rats and the Bon Jovis just swept them aside, really, even though I feel that Y&T had the vocals that were closer to. It's interesting you've said they're one of your favorite bands, and then Sammy Hagar, because there's a feel in Hagar's voice, isn't there? And Y&T, there's a similar feel to the vocal delivery.
Yeah. I've always thought that, Dave sounds the most like anyone. It's like Sammy. He's his own guy. He's got his own style, but he does have a little bit of that Hagar, which if you watched any of the footage when Sammy was doing his Decades of Rock shows, where he had Denny Carmassi and Bill Church, and then he had Dave Meniketti subbing in for the late Ronnie Montrose, and they did Rock Candy, and Dave sang the second verse. I'm thinking, this is perfect. Like, this just works. I would buy an album by this foursome.
Yeah, very, very much so. I mean, Hagar in the UK was already a name, because I think Montrose had done, although they didn't chart with the first Montrose album or anything, they toured with bands like Status Quo, but it had sold behind the scenes really, really well. The first Montrose album. Yeah, steadily. Yeah. The first Montrose album is still my favorite album of all time.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's timeless. Yeah. It's a template for Van Halen a few years later.
It's so strange how that worked out,
Yeah,
you got a band produced by Ted Templeman. They're named after the guitar player. Sammy's on vocals. I write about this in the book. I first discovered the Montrose album because the very first thing I bought from Sammy Hagar is what I call a truck stop tape, which is it's a record label, cash in kind of thing that they used to do. They'd put CDs out like this too. They weren't sanctioned by the artist, but they were official label releases. They'd have really cheap looking covers, and they'd have a mix of songs. And usually they were put out by an artist's former label once they started to get more successful on another label. It's the oldest, it's shooting a dead horse or whatever you want to call it. And I found this cassette of Sammy called Red Hot, which was a mixture of songs from his All Night Long and his Live 1980 album, which was recorded at the Hammersmith. And I'd like to hear that whole concert, but that's another story. But it had Space Station Number 5 and Bad Motor Scooter on it. And I didn't know they weren't solo songs, but it wasn't until I read in a Hit Parader magazine that listed, the top 100 metal albums of all time, I saw those song titles. So I knew now to seek that out. Again, it's pre-internet. And I remember finding that first Montrose album, and it very quickly became one of my favorite albums of all time. I think that it's ahead of its time. The production sounds so crisp and clear for 1973. The drums are just Rock Candy, Make It Last. They're every bit as powerful as the John Bonham drum sounds, I think. But it was American. It was a very American style of music. And that album is it's so funny because it was such a slow build. It took 4 years for it to certify gold, and it didn't certify platinum until 1986. But because Warner Brothers was wise enough to never let it go out of print, people just kept discovering it, and tons of people have covered songs from it. So it's just it was almost a word of mouth thing, but it ended up being a million seller. And I know Sammy did way better in the UK in his Capitol years than he did in the States where he's from. I think Danger Zone, the album, peaked at number 12 over there.
Yes, it did.
Which he was having a hard time getting an album to crack, higher than 85 on the Billboard chart. I think his highest charting album might have been at 71. So they just weren't doing anything with him. So, and it wasn't until he switched over to Geffen that he started to sell records in North America. Really, really just in the States. In Canada, Sammy's one of those artists that there are certain artists that are sort of like U.S. centric. They never cross the border up here to get up here that much. Y&T would be another one. But these are artists that, a lot of people know who Sammy Hagar is, and they maybe they've got all the Van Halen albums, but I just don't think they realize, he's got, 15 odd albums if you know what to look for. Some of them aren't very easy to find, but they're all worth searching out.
I totally agree. And one of the things I liked about in this book, because you mentioned earlier about the fact that you've had people suddenly go back to discover albums that they'd written off or felt that it wasn't for them. And then your books have made people kind of think, I need to go think about that. You did that with me on the album Three Lock Box. I always felt Standing Hampton I thought was brilliant. And Three Lock Box I always felt was disappointing, and I kind of never really played it very much. And so after reading this and the fact that you really liked it and gave it, I thought I need to go back and listen to that. And it's interesting how the passing of years has an effect on you, how you position things. And also because of your enthusiasm for the other albums, which I do feel very aligned to, I thought I need to revisit this with a fresh pair of ears. And I did. And it does sound, and it's taken on a totally different feel. So thank you.
Well, that's great. Yeah, Three Lock Box has just always been a favorite album of mine. I always found it very easy on the ears. Standing Hampton is a pretty good album. I think that something when he changed over to Geffen, and I don't think it's his writing ability got better. I just think that he had
sound, isn't it?
He had the famous A&R guy John Kolodner over his shoulder going, I think you can write a better song, and not just recording the first 10 songs he wrote, because he wrote great songs on those Capitol albums. I mean, Plain Jane, and he wrote songs that had potential to be hits. The fact of the matter that he wrote I've Done Everything for You, well, that was a top 10 single waiting to happen, but it took Rick Springfield recording it to make it into a hit. That was another thing that confused me on that tape that I picked up, that truck stop tape, as I referred to it. It had I've Done Everything for You on it, and I remember thinking, why is he doing a Rick Springfield song? I had no idea. There were no credits inside this thing. I had to wait for a few years to go, oh, he wrote it, it is something how the passage of time can change. And I hope that, maybe someday I've been quite vocal. I'm not the biggest fan of the living it up, like the sitting by the beach, strumming acoustic guitars and, doing that sort of thing. I'm not really into that stuff at all. Maybe someday I will be, but I will say that I have really enjoyed it. The last two albums he did, the two Circle albums. So
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
And I hope he does another one. He says he's going to record an album with the lineup that he went on tour with last year. And I'm all for it. And Sammy's also one of those, freaks of nature in the best possible way that's pretty much kept his vocals. Like he's, the guy's 77 and he still sings at, I would say, an 80% level of what he was always able to do. Meniketti's like that too. I mean, Meniketti's gone through cancer treatments and he still brings it live as a vocalist. There are just a handful of guys that can still do it. And there's guys that are 20 years younger than them that are just a shadow of their former self. So that's worth celebrating. And then there's people that just don't like Sammy, period. They didn't like it when he joined Van Halen and they've hated him ever since. And I've never really understood where that comes from. It's like, what did a band do to you so bad that you just don't like the guy individually?
I have never understood that, because although I obviously saw the original Van Halen, they supported Black Sabbath and destroyed them, and they were huge in the UK. They were huge around the world, but when he left, and and Dave Lee Roth released Eat 'Em and Smile, I thought, well, fine, because that was a great album. Introduced me to Steve Vai. And so I thought, what's Van Halen going to do? And someone said, who's joined them? And I said, no. And they went to Sammy Hagar. I thought, perfect. I just thought this is going to be great. And I love Van Halen with Sammy Hagar. And I think Sammy Hagar's voice, one of my favorite albums is HSAS because of Sammy Hagar's vocal performance, the way he sings on that. I think he's one of my favorite vocalists of all time. And he's no slouch at being a guitarist either, but he's an all-round performer.
Songwriter, singer, guitar player. He's very self-deprecating, but he's a perfectly good guitar player.
He's very good.
The HSAS album that's got the Top of the Rock. I still think that Missing You, they should have waited and put that on VOA, because I think that could have been a hit. That's just a great great melodic rock song
It's
that
great,
I
isn't it?
think that album got buried because I think that Geffen Records were like, all right, we'll let you do this, but we're putting a lot of money into you as Sammy Hagar, and how long was Columbia Records going to let Neil Sean moonlight from Journey, who were at their peak?
Yeah,
You know what I
exactly.
mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think they should have saved Missing You for the next proper Hagar album and put it out as a single, because I remember when I first heard that, and I didn't find that album till the early 90s because it was out of print. And I remember hearing that and going, that's a hit. In any other era, that would have been a hit single. Why? Why was it buried? Why did they release Whiter Shade of Pale as the single from that album? Look, I think they do a great version of
They
that
do,
song,
they
but
do.
my
Yeah.
goodness, I
Yeah.
mean, Missing You was just such an obvious choice for me. But that whole album, I mean, I used to think that album had like three good songs. The rest of it was kind of weird. Now I like the whole thing because, obviously before I put any of these books out, I'd listen over and over and make sure what I'm thinking I remember about an album is, because sometimes I'll listen to something and go, why did I not like this one? This is good all the way through, or this is not quite as good as I remember it.
Yeah,
And you have
yeah.
to make sure your memory is correct because it's a strange thing. But yeah, I listened to the HSAS album a ton, and I thought, yeah, this is really good. And I think if it had come out under his own name, it probably would have been more successful.
Yeah, because I mean, when he was touring the UK, he was just as well known as being a guitarist as a vocalist. I think nowadays people see him as a vocalist, but I
Yeah,
mean, I remember hearing All Night. The album was called All Night Long in the UK, which is a live album,
yeah,
and Bad Motor Scooter. When he says to, "Come on, Gary, take your best shot," and they have that
yeah.
guitar back at
That's a
the end.
great guitar
I mean,
duo.
that's
Yeah,
because he was guitarist almost first.
yeah.
Um, and I do feel that those two singles, the stat live album, that must have been a longer gig somewhere. There should be a double album, but
Oh, both of them. The
yeah,
all night long. Some places it's called Loud and Clear, but
that's it.
that's a great performance. And then Live 1980 obviously came out in '83 again after Sammy had gone
Yeah,
over to Geffen. Now that's not a truck stop tape because that's a legitimate release with a front and back cover and everything, but it was obviously older material. And you'll notice they didn't repeat any songs because it's only stuff from Street
yeah.
Machine and Danger Zone. But they obviously would have recorded that whole performance. So I want Rock Candy Records or Rhino or someone to put out Sammy Hagar live at Hammersmith 1980, the full show. And
Absolutely.
what would even be better is if somebody had filmed it, because there's not a
Oh
lot of
no, there's not, is there? No, there's not.
officially filmed footage. I mean, there's great footage of Montrose on the old gray whistle test. That stuff is priceless.
Yeah, totally.
Doing Bad Motor Scooter and
Space Station #5.
Space
Yeah,
Station #5. Yeah, and that's another thing. Space Station #5. 1973.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You talk about ahead of its time and the way that Sammy could scream, but scream melodically. I don't get the hatred for the guy. It's like, how are you going to get mad at somebody for taking an open gig, taking a gig that was offered to him, which was Van Halen? So, it's just so old. And I'll post it to fan sites once in a while. And if they're Sammy Hagar fan sites, it's one thing. But if they're more general Van Halen sites, inevitably somebody will post, a comment. Yeah, Sammy.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just like you haven't got an original thought in your body. I've been hearing this since 1986. I'm glad the internet wasn't around back then because it would have been just, I've never understood that. To me, we had twice as many albums to buy because I like 5150 and I like Eat 'em and Smile. Now, Van Halen with Sammy was my favorite band. And like For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge is one of my favorite albums of all time. The one time I got to see Sammy at all, and the only time I ever saw Van Halen was on the Balance tour. It was fantastic. I was so disappointed the next year when
Yeah.
that whole thing fell apart. But it's there's a lot of music besides Van Halen he's been involved with, and I really wanted to talk about it. I do have a chapter in the book on Montrose, a chapter on Van Halen, and a chapter on Chickenfoot. But each of those albums get their own chapter, each of his studio albums. And I considered whether it's HSAS or The Circle or the Wabaritas, I consider them all Sammy Hagar albums because he's the driving force behind them
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
And that's how I approached it. And I'll tell you, I'd like nothing better than for him to put another album out, forcing me to do an updated version of this book. I want more music from these guys, not less.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, I can see a similarity in a connection between Y&T and Sammy Hagar. Kansas is a different beast. This is more of a progressive rock band, different vocal style, different songwriting style. What is it about Kansas that drew you in?
So this is interesting with Kansas. Like I grew up, in the hair metal era,
Yeah.
86, 87, and I was watching. We didn't have MTV in Canada. We had Much Music. It was a 24-hour video channel. I was just a student of that, listened to Top 40 radio, and the first thing I ever heard from Kansas was the song All I Wanted from the Power album, which is more of it's a sort of a mid-tempo rock ballad, but I loved it instantly. And I didn't know it, the names of anybody, but I love Steve Walsh's voice.
Oh, yeah.
And I never really took hold of them then, but a few years later, I found myself getting into a bunch of older bands that I knew influence bands that I liked. So that's in '92. Around that time, I got into Queen and Purple and Boston and Leonard Skinner, and Kansas was one of those bands. And I always would see album covers by them and think, man, they got some cool album covers. I wonder what they sound like. So that was when I first discovered them, I liked the fact that they had their prog stuff like Song for America or Journey for Mariabron, but they had an AOR phase like Fight Fire with Fire and Play the
Yeah,
Game
yeah, yeah,
Tonight. I love the fact that they
yeah.
had both of those sides to them. It was so different. They were all over the place, totally versatile. And they very quickly became a favorite band of mine. And I knew that they'd sold millions of albums, but I think that it was they're one of those bands where a lot of people bought Leftoverture, a lot of people bought Point of No Return, but there's the peaks and valleys in the sales of their albums. And I also think that the last two albums that they put out, Absence of Presence and The Prelude Implicit, are both fantastic. And
Yeah.
that's another reason that I wanted to do these books. Same thing with Sammy Hagar. If I wasn't very excited about the new music they were creating, I don't think I'd have been as excited to do a book on their full career. But I wanted to make sure that the albums that came out in recent years, maybe on smaller labels, got just as much credence as an album that sold 4 million copies. And that's what I wanted to do with Kansas. And yeah, that's been really great when people have told me that said, man, I always heard their songs and liked them. I never owned any of their albums. And now I've got 2 or 3 of them and I think I'm going to get some more. And it's like, great, because they've got so many, some of the classic bands, they did great singles, but maybe the albums weren't good all the way through. I think Kansas made great albums. And whether you're going back to the first album, which is pretty heavily prog, or something like Monolith, which is a dark, demanding album, but I just love it. I love Audio Visions, and that's an album that nobody talks about. This
Yeah,
is
I
a,
like
this
that.
is a band where nobody talks about these albums. I think the album they put out in '95, Freaks of Nature, is an unheralded classic. It just had the misfortune of not being on a major label and coming out in 1995. But I wanted to talk about these things and find like-minded people to chat with
Do you think
about them.
that? Do you think that because you got into each of these artists later on, you know, that you went back and explored their back catalogues without any prejudice? What I'm trying to say is, for sometimes when fans come in at the beginning, as soon as that band kind of changes direction anyway, they just bail.
Right.
So even if we look at bands like Deep Purple, a lot of people, once it got to Stormbringer, they just thought that's it, we're done. Or Blackmore leaves, after that,
Yeah.
not interested, no Blackmore, no Purple. And the same with, you mentioned with Kansas, when they went through the AOR period, a lot of the people who grew up and started as Kansas fans probably thought, oh, they're no longer Kansas anymore. But because you came in afterwards, you look through the whole catalogue as being like just part of the same story.
Yeah, exactly. That is so dead on how it happened. I remember I had a couple of their albums, and then I got the best of, and I remember it goes, Carry On Wayward Son, obviously, and Point of No Return, which I'd never heard before at the time,
Wow.
and then Fight Fire with Fire, which I'd never. And I'm like, I didn't know they had songs like this. So instead of being repulsed, oh man, I got to get all of these albums and hear all of these songs. I want to know what else they did. You're absolutely right. A very good example of that. When you kind of get into a band with a big back catalog and you kind of listen to them all in one big chunk, I didn't get in. I was late getting into Kiss. I didn't get into Kiss until 1993, and oddly enough, it was Alive 3 that did it because all the songs that I ever liked by them were in one place. I was never. I didn't know much about them. All I really ever knew were their 80s videos. My joke about this, but it's absolutely true. I thought Paul Stanley sang everything because all the videos I saw were Paul's songs, right?
Yeah.
But and when I started buying Kiss albums, I knew that there was this album called Music from the Elder that nobody liked to talk about, and the band didn't even like to talk about. That made me want to buy it. That made me want to listen to it all the more.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those freaks that'll say, I like Music from the Elder. I
do.
I really, really like the album. But I say that with a caveat. If I had been an active Kiss fan in 1981 waiting for their next album and Music from the Elder is what came out, I'm not so sure I would have liked it the way I do now. But when you're just listening to a bunch of albums, I like that one, and that's just another one of them, right? So it does make a difference. But there is something to be said for that, for going back with fresh ears. I mean, when I got into Van Halen, I got into all of it. I got all of the Van Halen albums. I got, Dave didn't have many solo albums. I had all of those. And my next logical step was to find all the Sammys. I had no preconceived anything. That's like getting into Yes. Like my favorite Yes album is Drama. That's nothing against John Anderson, but
because it's your doorway in, isn't it? That makes such a difference.
Drama is a fantastic album. It's like, what is wrong? What is wrong with this album? Nothing. It's just people couldn't deal with the fact that it wasn't John Anderson or it wasn't Rick Wakeman and it was the Buggles. And I'm like, but listen to it. It's good.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So it has a lot to do with when you get on board. So, hopefully it can bring people around and go, that really is quite good. Or I guess I do like this, or I guess I do like this band. But, and it's like Y&T, like a lot of, purist Y&T fans, it's all about Black Tiger and Earthshaker and Mean Streak. And they don't like the Contagious and 10 stuff. I like all of it. And to me, like when they, they get into these lighter, poppier sounds, to me, that's not, what they used to call wimping out. To me, it's versatility. It's just like Kansas going AOR. So I love the fact that they have all these different tools in their toolbox and they can do these things and at the drop of a hat. Sometimes when bands do it, it comes off as forced, but a lot of times it's just, this is where we are at any one given time. You mentioned Purple. I think Come Taste the Band is a fantastic album. Yeah. I've got no problem with that stuff. But yeah, I can understand, there's only a handful of bands that I listened to that I was in on right on the ground floor. I usually got into them after they'd been around for a bit. So I didn't have that. You know what? I shouldn't say that. I do have that. I have that with Bon Jovi because Bon Jovi were the band that got me into harder rock music when Slippery When Wet came out. I was patient zero, 12 years old in 1986 when I heard You Give Love a Bad Name. And I said, not only do I want this, I want to know what other albums they have, and I want to know about other bands like this. Well, they started to get really, really, I think, boring and light, adult contemporary, and then country, and I just gave up on them. So I understand, but I don't begrudge anyone else who got into the band later on and likes that stuff. But there aren't as many examples. Most of the time I got into a band after they'd been around, and my running gag is oftentimes I'll get into a band like Y&T, and then they break up. or then they go on hiatus for a few years. So that's happened too.
Fantastic. So you've got a couple of other things in the pipeline. I know one of them is Night Ranger. And is that another band because you felt that no one else had covered them? Or again, is it another band in your kind of a band that you've really connected to over the...
I've always loved that band. Actually, I think this is the first time it'll be said publicly. But yeah, I've always loved Night Ranger. They have this great melodic sense to them, and they're kind of like, they're not like Kansas musically. They've sold a lot of albums. I don't think they sold enough. I don't think that they get the recognition that they should. And that's another band where you've got two singers, Jack Blades and Kelly Kagi, who still sing really, really well live.
And there's a connection in their styles that takes us to Y&T and Sammy Hagar, isn't there?
And really somebody melodic, said to me, somebody said, "Are you just going to write books about bands from the Bay Area. I'm like, I didn't plan it that way, but it seems like that. Yeah, I've just, I think that again, I don't think there's ever been a book on this band. So yeah, that's the next one for sure.
Fantastic. So, Tim, where's the best place for people to go to find your books?
My books are all exclusively through Amazon, and wherever you're, whether it's Amazon UK or wherever it is in the world, order it. And I think they take 2-3 days to get to you. So it's a pretty quick process to get them. Yeah, I'm grateful to everybody that's picked them up. I've sold them all over the world. I've sold books in Australia and Germany and all over the US and Canada and in the UK. And so it's been a real thrill getting to know people and having people write really nice reviews about them. And because nobody needs to, they must feel compelled to. So I must be doing something right. But yeah, right now, that's, I guess if you could say, that's my publisher, and it so far it's worked. So that's where people can find my books.
Well, for those of you watching and listening, the great thing about these books is the fact they act as like a catalyst for you to go back and explore albums sometimes that you've known yourself for a very long time, but it makes you want to revisit them and look at them and listen to them afresh. And also it makes you go back and rediscover the albums that you might have pushed aside thinking, no, that one isn't for me. So that's the great thing about them. I mean, you've also got a YouTube channel, haven't you?
Yeah. Tim's Vinyl Confessions, named after a Kansas album. So nobody was surprised when I announced I was doing a Kansas book. And I've had that since August of 2014. I like to think I've gotten better at doing that. I used to start doing that on an old video camera, and I sat right the very far corner of this room and held records up. So, but along the way, again, I've got to talk to a lot of cool people. I've got to interview, musicians. I've interviewed John Diamond and Aaron Lee from Y&T. I interviewed Tom Brislin from Kansas. I've been very fortunate. Andy Curran from Coney Hatch, another unsung band that I'm a huge fan of. I know you talked to Carl. Yeah, I know you talked to Carl there. I think I watched that when it was premiering. He's another guy that's got one of those bulletproof voices that doesn't age.
Yeah, fantastic vocalist. Yeah.
So, I do 3 episodes every weekend, and I post daily on all the socials, and and I always try to remind people, because I've got a lot more people that watch than have subscribed. I'm sure you run into that. This isn't adding up. Just hit subscribe. Costs you nothing, but it helps us.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I have that as well. I think about 70% of the people that watch my channel haven't subscribed yet, but that's okay. So where would you prefer people to come and find you? YouTube or social media or?
Well, YouTube is where the episodes are, and that's kind of the main thing. And really, all I try to do with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram is drive people to YouTube to hopefully check them out. But I post an album cover every day if it's a birthday or an album release date or something or a show I've been on, and I try to promote that too. I mean, we're all in this this community here and like-minded people, so it's good to give a shout out. But yeah, YouTube is the main thing.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Tim. Thank you for your time today. It's been fantastic talking to you. And I love the books. And I think everyone that will, I should just hold them up again for people that may not have seen them. But absolutely superb, and looking forward to hearing about the new ones and whatever you do next. But thank you so much for your time today. And hopefully we'll talk again when the next one makes its appearance.
I certainly hope so. Thank you very much for having me on, Phil. I appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thanks, Tim. Talk to you soon. A huge thank you to my guest, Tim Durling. Great chat there. 3 fantastic books, Y&T, Sammy Hagar, and Kansas. Just type in Tim Durling and you'll find his YouTube channel, and you can buy his books directly from Amazon, wherever you are in the world. And what I really like about these books is how they've made me go back to albums that I've not dismissed as such, but ones which I didn't really give maybe as much attention as I should have done because of my other personal favorites at the time. But I've also found the books interesting. You know that thing about you like an album and you like hearing other people talk about an album you like. I mean, that's a lot about what I do here, and what a lot of people do in a similar space on YouTube is you kind of, you like what you like, and someone else reaffirming, validating what you think about an album is fantastic. But what's really good here is hearing someone enthuse about an album that maybe you haven't given enough time to, because I find that fascinating. I always have done with the Now Spinning Magazine Facebook group. When someone talks about a doorway album, an album that got them into a band that might not be seen as one of the band's best sellers, or something that's seen as the best in the catalogue, but because of where you came in, it takes on a different personal meaning to you. And that's what's so fascinating about these books. And the panel books, of course, there's so many people I now know through YouTube and podcasting, etc. So you, as Tim said, you can almost hear the voices of the people you've seen on YouTube talking as a panel about these bands with such passion and such love for the music and the musicians who made it. I just love it. Fantastic stuff. So thank you, Tim. And Tim's got another couple of books on the way, and one of them is going to be Night Ranger, which I've been very luckily asked to write the foreword for that. So thank you, everybody, for watching and being here. And thank you for all of your support. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the website at nowspinning.co.uk. Wherever you are on social media, so is Now Spinning Magazine. Remember, music is the healer and the doctor. Please support us by becoming a patron or YouTube member, and you'll get access to the WhatsApp group and to the Facebook group, where you can chat with like-minded people. And we even have our own virtual pub called the Now Spinning Arms, where we meet up twice a month, again, to chat and build bridges and friendships with people that just love music. So keep spinning those discs. Take care, everybody. And I'll talk to you all very, very soon.